Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. This will be a slightly unusual video for me. I don't normally do how-tos. I personally don't believe in telling other people what to do. But what I do like to do is say what I do. That's a lot of do's. Anyway, in this video I'll go over my winter experiment, as I've called it, which basically just means that everything grew intermediate and didn't get a proper rest. Results of that are varied. Some of my orchids took no notice of that fact whatsoever and have bloomed and started to grow this year, and they're doing fine. I don't plan on changing anything for those. There are those that have done okay without a winter rest, but I'm confident could do better. And then there are a relatively small set that have been quite pitiful and decided to refuse to flower whatsoever, which was possibly expected, but I just wanted to check. I just want to know those that really need the rest. For me to do a winter rest is not easy. I grow intermediate. I have lots of plants in here that do not want to get cold in the winter, and I've only got one place to keep them all. But I've worked out a way of doing a winter rest, which involves a little discomfort on my part, but I'll live with it because I'm not going to do it for long. So what I will do is, my bedroom has a very large window that faces primarily south. It's sort of slightly southwest, but mainly south. So it's the brightest window I've got. So those that need the winter rest are going to be accommodated on that windowsill probably in early January, not before. They can stay in here till then. And then for a period of say 3 to 4 weeks, I'll turn the radiator off in there. I don't need to worry about humidity. The temperature is going to drop right down in our winter, and they will get their rest. I'll withhold water. They'll have already had their water greatly reduced by that time. That I'll have stopped feeding them altogether, probably mid-November, something like that. And we'll see how that experiment does for the coming winter. But in this video I'll go over the successes and failures of what I actually did, and which plants have actually done okay and which have not done very well. And we'll see how it goes. Let's get started. Okay, this is Dendrobium glomeratum, and it has beautiful flowers. This is on the must stay list because I love the flowers. I got it as a young plant, reasonably short cane, deciduous, another short cane there, another one round the back there. Those are the canes it had. And at the time it had a new growth, which is this cane, and I got it early last year. It did actually flower on those deciduous canes, but this is my cane, so that's last year's growth, but it's still growing. This grew through the winter and is still growing now. That cane has not finished growing, and I will still push that cane hard until it decides it's grown enough. It has, however, got a new growth as well. So this comes into a category of a type of growth pattern that I've seen with a few of my dendrobiums, and so they will get treated the same. Just behind it is Nestor, which has been in several videos because that was a spectacular flowering session that it had, but those were not my flowers. I bought it in flower. Flowered on this cane with the leaves at the base, and the leaves dropped. Strangely enough, it's still got green leaves on the end, and it also had this one huge leafless cane, and it started a new growth for me. And I did say in a previous video, new growths on dendrobiums, push them hard, and that's the results you get. We're only halfway through the growing season, and that is luxurious growth. That's what you need from your new canes. Push them hard. I water and feed this copiously, I think's the expression. It doesn't dry out, it gets watered a lot, and these are the results. Nice big strong cane. This cane on this one will do the same thing. Okay, so this category are those that I call virtually deciduous. In other words, they grow a new cane with leaves on, And then at some time in the not too distant future, they start to drop their leaves. So the leaves don't last that long on the canes. I mean, in the tree world, obviously deciduous means exactly that. Every year they drop all of their leaves and then they grow a new set. Dendrobiums very rarely adhere to that strictly. It's more like a year and a half, maybe even 2 sometimes. And I've got some that are in like a 3.5 year cycle before they lose their leaves. Semi-deciduous, we could call those. Anyway, these two are in that category. They had no winter rest. Nestor hasn't had a winter with me yet. I got it in April, so I haven't had it long enough. And I do believe, because it's mainly anosmum, if it doesn't get a rest, then this nice shiny new cane I've got here is not going to do well. It needs a rest. It comes into that category. Glomeratum probably comes into the same category. If I want blooms along the length of that nice big strong cane that I've grown, I'm going to need to rest it. So that will come into the rest category. Whether glomeratum would do okay without a rest, I'm not going to risk it. That's going to get rested this time round. Okay. Right, another one in this type of dendrobium class. I set my dendrobiums up in what I call sets or classes, and it just means that they all have similar habits and have been given or are going to get similar treatment in my environment. Now, that might not be how others do it. As I said, this video is not an instruction manual. It's not telling you what to do. It's just telling you what I do. And some of it works, some of it doesn't. Choose which bits you like, choose which bits you don't like, or just do your own thing, which is basically what I do, with some calculated guesswork in there. Anyway, this is Dendrobium anosmum, but it's the semi-alba version. It has a lovely flower. It's a weak plant, and it's also quite a young plant. When I got it, it had a lousy root system. I put it in an open basket with chunky bark, give it some air around the roots like they like. They say squash them in tiny little pots. Well, yes, you can do that. And some of mine I've done that. Some of them have grown into those pots and are now bursting at the seams, but they're still okay in those pots, so I leave them there. This one got an open basket. That's what I had at the time. Again, it is growing a single new cane, and that cane isn't growing badly, but it's not what I would call vigorous. The older canes are only that long. So it's a third of the way up its cane length, but it's only June. That's got a lot of growing season to get into a full-size cane, so I'm happy that it will do that. I would have been a lot happier if it had pushed out several instead of just the one. Anyway, that one had a single flower for me this year, which was quite poor. Nonetheless, it was a smashing flower, but it can do better. That'll get a rest. Here's another one, comes into a similar growth pattern. This one has got far too many old canes. Now, I know some people say don't ever cut the old canes off because they help support the plant. Well, yes, they do. I'm not going to disagree in any shape or form. That's how they are. However, I've got to live with it. I've got to look at it. It's got to live with me. And to do that, I like to have plants that have a nice appearance. So some of these older canes will get cut off. You can throw your hands up in horror if you choose to do so, but that's how I work. And on this plant, I'll be happy to do that on the basis it is pushing up quite a few new canes. So by the end of this growing season, it will have a new strength to it based on those new canes, with the support of some older canes. But it's not going to need the support of all of the older canes. So I will trim some off and tidy it, as I call it. Okay, that one's primulinum, sorry, I always say that one wrong. And again, it has lovely flowers, but it's going to need a proper rest. 0 flowers this year, absolutely 0, whereas the previous year it did have flowers, so it needs a rest. We'll have to rest that one. Okay, nobile types next. This is a primary hybrid, it's Cassiope. It's just coming into bloom now, so it doesn't follow the normal pattern of sort of late winter, early spring flowering like a nobile would under normal circumstances. But you have to bear in mind when you get a primary cross, it's got 2 parents. One of the parents of this is nobile, the species, and that particular plant needs a very distinct cool, bright, dry winter rest or it will not flower. The nobile species is a fussy blighter, and if you don't treat it right you'll get either sporadic or zero blooming, so you know you've got to get your act together if you've got the species. However, the other parent of this is Dendrobium moniliforme. That's a continuous grower. In other words, it doesn't rest itself. It's more like a phalaenopsis type. You know, it needs to be kept evenly moist. It grows throughout the seasons. You know, it'll have a bigger growing season relating to sort of more monsoon times, and then it'll slow down a bit when the rains reduce a bit, but it doesn't stop. So it doesn't need a distinct rest. So with a primary hybrid, what would you do with that one then? Yeah, pause for thought. What would you do with it? It's a hybrid between a distinct winter rest type and a continuous grower. You can't do half and half really, can you? Anyway, I treat this one exactly the same as the rest of my noblies. They do not get a winter rest. Nobile hybrids have had that fussiness taken out of them. They just don't need it. You can grow those in a house along with your phalaenopsis, a bit more light obviously, but you know, they'll do fine. They're not that fussy on high humidity. And they'll bloom. They'll do okay. They're a good plant to have around, apart from the fact they don't half get big. Well, mine do anyway. I hope everybody else's does as well. There's a couple of other hybrids at the back there of various forms. I'm not going to get them all down because they're big and clumsy and they knock stuff over. The other one I've got that's coming to the end of its flowering now is Prima Donna. That's been in flower since January. It's just coming to the end of its blooms now. Great big strappy plant, monster of a thing. But as you can see, a lot of these old canes, although they've still got their leaves, they have flowered on most of the leaf joints. And that is a trait with the nobile types. Once a cane has flowered on a particular node, i.e. the gap between two leaves, it's not going to flower there again. So if you've had a mass blooming and you've had wonderful flowers the whole length of the cane, as far as flowering is concerned, that cane's had it. It's not going to do it again. Now, these do drop their leaves. Slowly but surely you will end up with leafless canes. And obviously you grow some nice new ones and you've got shiny new canes with lots of nice leaves on. Eventually the number of leafless canes will outweigh the ones with leaves. Your plant will start to look tatty. Now I know you're all going to throw your hands up in horror, but I tidy my nobile types and some of my others. Once the number of old canes exceeds the number of new canes by a lot and it looks tatty, depending on the number of new canes, I will trim the old ones off. Some, not all. So for example, we've got one with 10 old canes that have dropped all their leaves. And this year it's grown 5 new, strong, good canes. The strength of that plant is in those new canes, with some support from the older canes. But it doesn't need twice as many old canes to support those new ones. If, however, you were at the thin end of the wedge and you had a plant with, say, 3 or 4 old canes and it only pushed up 1 new cane that wasn't that strong, you're going to need to keep all of those old canes until that plant gets its strength. So go steady with trimming old ones, but, you know, you won't get hung, drawn and quartered if you trim your plant and make it tidy. Just balance the strength of the plant. Don't take the life out of the plant by taking all the old canes off. But there again, don't put up with a tatty looking object just because somebody somewhere 40 years ago said don't trim the canes off. Use a bit of sense, that's the way around it. So my noblies don't get a winter rest. They do fine, they flower well. I have no plans on changing that. Okay, that's the nobile types. Right, this next little group are distinctly semi-deciduous. In other words, they hold their leaves for some time, but eventually will lose them. But it's not like an annual thing, it's more like a 3-year or 3-year plus cycle in some cases. This little one is chapaense. It blooms on and off for a fair bit of the year. So although I believe it might do okay with a winter rest, this one's not going to get a winter rest, despite being the type of cane dendrobium that most people would do that with. It's got several good new canes coming on it, got a bud there still to come, and it's got a couple of blooms out now. It's a lovely flower. It's very, very delicate. Not huge, but doesn't matter. Beautiful deep colour in the throat there. Chapaense. Lovely little plant. It is still a relatively young plant, and I don't think those canes are ever going to get much bigger than that. So it's a tidy little plant as well, which is good. And at the moment it has no totally leafless canes. It is still a young plant though. That's that one. This one again comes into a similar category. This is slow. I'd say bordering on stalled. It has flowered for me. It is a relatively young plant. A little sort of subgroup here. This is the black hair type. But it has flowered on those larger canes. You can see the little stumps where the flowers once were. So I've had flowers on this, but this year I've had nothing. So conclusion, needs a dry winter rest and it'll do better. Okay, and at the moment, as I said, it's stalled. I've got no new growth this year. Those two smaller canes are last year's, and you know, you can see they're newer than the two older ones. But I do believe if you look closely, you might, if the camera can pick it up, just about see a little nubbin on that cane. There's also one round the back of that leaf there. So it might be going to push some flowers out, but at the moment, quite honestly, on this plant, I'd prefer to see some new growths. It's doing nothing. There's very little root activity. My mouth won't work. More coffee. But basically, it's stalled. It's not doing very well. I'm hoping it'll pick up. Next one. This is a strange one. This is findlayanum. And it does have strange canes with bulbous bits. It's just a funny looking plant, and I love it as a consequence. It's different. Huge genus, Dendrobiums, obviously, found in many parts of the world, you know, right down in Australia, where you've got plants bordering on the edge of the desert, into the deepest steamy jungles, up onto the mountainsides, into the Himalayas. They grow all over the place. Marvellous genus and infinite variety. But this is a strange one. It's doing well at the moment. It's pushed out loads of new canes, which have got plenty of growing season left. But again, if you look, some of the new canes are already larger than the older ones. Good root system pushing out, attaching to the mountain places. Zero flowerer. Now that could be, it's a young plant. But would you call that a young plant with that number of canes and the size of them? No. So I believe that needs a winter rest. So it's going to get put in that category. Unusual looking plant. This one's a monster. This is friedericksianum. If I can get it to unhook itself. It's currently got a few blooms on it. That's not a good show. It has flowered before for me, but again, the time before wasn't a good show. This, however, is throwing up new canes like it's going out of fashion. It's a strong plant, despite very little visible root activity. This is one of those dendrobiums does a funny thing with its roots. It dumps them. They just die back completely. That would normally correspond with its dry winter rest. And then when its new growth starts, it chucks out the new roots. But because this one hasn't been rested, it's chucking out the new canes and not necessarily starting the new root system. But I'm not particularly worried about it. It's a strong plant. And again, as far as tidying a plant is concerned, those little old canes that are hanging down there are no longer any use to the plant. It's got leafless canes up here that are big and strong. That's where the strength of the plant lies. This bit down here is a waste of space. It's not doing anything to support that plant at all. So it will get trimmed. And on this one, I'm probably going to take some of that moss out because it is starting to deteriorate. It's attached to its mount with wire. It can't fall off, but it doesn't need all that moss. And if I'm going to give that a dry winter rest, that will help me rest it. Because it, you know, when I do wet it, if I have to, it won't get soaked because there won't be so much moss to hold the moisture. So that's that little group. Don't you dare fall off. Right, this little section are all relatively small plants, small tidy plants in some cases. This is the squash grape plant. I love this little plant. This is a zero flowerer. This is jenkinsii. This is going to get rested. I believe next year we will have a pretty good show on that one. There's not a lot more I can say. It's never flowered for me. This is up near a specimen plant. This should be flowering on a regular basis, and it's not. It's pushed out loads of new growths this year. All those silvery coloured canes are this year's growth so far. It's done well. It's doing well, but it's not flowering. So winter rest for you, sunshine. This one is trigonopus. It's a slow grower, that's for sure. Black hair type, yeah. And those two tall canes at the back are the ones it grew last year. So once it gets going, it does grow. Again, a zero flowerer. But I've only just noticed down the base there, you can probably just about see it, it does have a new growth starting. So slow but sure. And some of that moss is going to have to come off. Why do I say that? Because I've just looked at this one. This is Dendrobium senile. And it's pushing out two nice new growths at the top of the plant. The previous canes underneath are the three below. Somebody said it looks like a tarantula. Yeah, maybe. It's a bit hairy. But down underneath here, I've just now discovered a problem. The problem is there. That moss has completely broken down and rotted off the older canes on the plant. So I've just yanked all that lot out. So a word of warning, watch your moss on mounts and definitely in pots. This is pushing out nice new roots. There's not anything wrong with the plant, it's just where it was has deteriorated. It's wired on, but consequently due to that deterioration, and part of that will be me not getting it totally dry in the winter. So I have to hold my hands up to that one. And that one's going to follow suit if I don't get some of that moss out. It only lasts so long. Anyway, that one has got a much thinner amount of moss around the part of the plant that is growing new roots. So that bit will be okay. Underneath has had a lot of the stuff taken off, and would you believe it? That, I believe, is a flower spike. Right at the base of that old cane, just next to that wire, a little bit of bright green. This one has flowered for me, but this year it did nothing. Maybe it's just going to have a little go. We shall see. Anyway, that's that group. They all need a proper winter rest. As I say, the senile has flowered before, but that was 2 years ago. Last year it didn't flower, and certainly this year it hasn't so far. So that's that little group, and watch your moss. It does deteriorate and it can take out your root system, so especially if it's wet. Okay, this little group is phalaenopsis types and those that need similar care. So although they're not Dendrobium phalaenopsis, I still group them together because they still need looking after in a similar way. This one's Dendrobium moniliforme. It's the variety variegata, hence the nice leaves. This one is covered in what I thought was buds. They may be kikis. They're very slow moving, whatever they are. But anyway, this one needs similar care to phalaenopsis type. It's a continuous grower. In other words, it doesn't need a particularly strong rest of any kind. It'll grow continuously throughout the year. Obviously, like I said, in the UK, when the day lengths get down well below 9 hours, heading towards their minimum length of 7.5 hours, the light level is poor quality within that time span. The plant's going to slow down to an almost stop. You have to look at your orchids and think, does this orchid need water? Does it need food? Now, if the light level and the consequences of the short days are reducing its growth to next to nothing, then no, it doesn't need a lot of food, if any, and it certainly doesn't need to stay wet all the time. So you have to adjust according to your environment. If you grow in a place where the day length doesn't change much and only varies between 11 and 13 hours, a plant probably wouldn't even take any notice of that, then a continuous grower means just that. It's going to grow all the time. And if it's actively growing, feed and water it. It's as simple as that. Let your plant tell you. This one for me won't get a lot of water and next to no feed during the UK winter. Nonetheless, it does not get a dry winter rest. It doesn't need that sort of treatment. It doesn't come from that sort of environment. So it lives in my class with the phalaenopsis types, as does this one. This is Victoria reginea. I can never say that flipping word. You know what I mean. I'll do a pop-up. Now this was just bought as kikis, so never expected much from this, but nonetheless it's grown and growing. I'll say growing, not grown, because it hasn't finished. It's still got its growing tip, so it's still on the move. That's its first new cane. It's got another one coming out here. So I think that was the last lot of kikis I will ever buy, but nonetheless this was a better looking plant as a bunch of kikis than any of the other plants I could see that were more mature plants. So I've sacrificed getting flowers quickly for what will be a stronger, better plant. In this case it's worth it because I really wanted this plant. This has been on my list for a while. I'm relatively confident that on that cane that's actually lost its leaves, those nubbins are moving, so I might actually get a couple of flowers on that. You never know, but it's young. It's a young plant. It's kikis. Now this one comes from relatively cold environment, so it's down the bottom end of intermediate, but it's still within that category. It could go cooler than my temperatures without any harm, but it'll also do okay in the temperatures I've got. So it should do okay in my environment. Time will tell, obviously. And then behind that are some standard Dendrobium phalaenopsis types. They got a bit neglected for a while, so they haven't done as well as they could. I mean, this one's got two nice new growths pushing out there. About time too, because it's got one stump. Can't even call that a cane. That's not very good at all. Then it's got that one there that's long lost its leaves. And its last large cane, which shows its potential for size, that's a pretty big cane, but nonetheless it lost one leaf. It's now got two left, so this whole plant has only got two leaves to photosynthesize, so it's not full of energy, it's not bursting with life, but with two new canes coming on, that will pull on okay. And then it's got that sticking out there. Flowers or kiki? Time will tell. I'm not sure, but I've got time. I'll wait patiently. So just a standard phalaenopsis type hybrid. That's actually got a name. It's Thai Angel. Does have a very nice flower. Another little one at the back. Not growing particularly well at the moment. It seems to be having a rest. It's not getting given one. It's decided to take one. It's got no new growth showing at the moment, but nonetheless it's got good sets of leaves. It has flowered. It will flower again. I mean, these flower from the top. You can see the canes, so it has flowered before. But they can flower from lower leaf joints. They don't only flower from the top leaf joint. That's normally the first point of flowering for a cane, is straight out the top. But it can continue and flower from lower leaf joints, so don't ever give up on that top growth, you know. There's another one here. This is named, this is Polar Star. It lost its leaf on that cane. That's a stump thing from when it was very young, I'm sure. And it's grown a couple of new canes recently. They're pushing on. One there and another one down below. Still relatively young, but they're actively growing, slowly but surely. And it's got another little tiny new one coming there. So this one's pushing on. Again, attractive flowers. So as far as their care is concerned with me, in other words, don't do exactly what I say. This is in my environment with my levels of light, my short days in the winter and all that sort of stuff. These I class as continuous growers, with the proviso that if it's a short winter day, it doesn't need drowning. They like to be evenly moist, but I still use that as a guideline, not a rule. So, you know, when we're having horrible dull winter weather in the UK where I'm struggling to keep the daytime temperatures up, I'm okay with nighttime temperatures. It's the daytime that's the hassle, trying to get that differential, trying to actually get a difference between my low of 14 and 15 and actually getting it up above 20 to actually get that differential, which is quite important for most orchids. So they get even care, they get intermediate temperatures. As I say, there's one amongst these that needs lower temperatures than the others. It consequently lives in a place where it gets a little bit more movement of air, which actually keeps it that little bit cooler. So that's that set. Okay, to finish up then, this is harveyanum. This has been in flower since January on and off. The latest two spikes are just going over, but it's still got more to come. There's another spike there. There's one down the bottom there with buds to come. So it's going to carry on. That had no rest and it's doing fine without it as far as I'm concerned, so it's not going to get one. We've got this monster up here, which is my farmeriXgriffithianum cross. That had no rest. It's flowering well as a consequence, so I probably won't rest that one. I've got a few others that I haven't necessarily gone into detail on. There's that stardust-like hybrid of some sort, no ID. There's stardust itself down there. They're a type of nobile at the end of the day, even though they haven't got much nobile in them, but they can be treated the same. I've got one last oddity, and this is a one-off. It's the only one I've got like it, and I've never heard of anything else like it. This is hercoglossum. It's got a tiny little base to it. It's pushing out a couple of new canes there, 3 in fact. 4, I can see another one just started, and it's growing some new roots. It pushes out its canes, it grows quite strongly, but the strange thing it does do is not stop growing the canes. As you can see, it's quite a large plant. It covers a lot of ground, even though it's a bit spindly, but the flowers are just beautiful. I don't care what this plant looks like, the flowers are well worth it. They're nearly gone now, they're virtually over. Lovely little flowers though, very delicate, and it's one of my favourite dendrobiums, but it does have a strange growth habit. The canes grow upwards, they eventually become heavy enough to become pendulous, so that's its nature, and it loses its leaves from this is what the new canes look like. They have a bare bit at the bottom and then they have their leaves at the top. Nothing unusual there. The difference with this one is the growing tip doesn't stop. So these are older canes, and these down here are quite old canes, but to a degree they carry on growing and they keep flowering on the sections as it goes along. It's got a very unusual growth pattern. This hasn't had any form of rest. It's flowered wonderfully this year, so I probably won't give it a formal rest. So, to sum up, what can we look at while we're summing up? Take your pick, there's loads. Let's go back to that one. Right, to sum up then, we've got those that haven't had a formal rest that obviously need one. And what I'll do is I'll put literally all my dendrobiums in the description, and some details, how they got treated, what the results were, because it was an experiment for me. We've got your continuous growers. Now they do slow right down in the winter, but they don't necessarily stop. You've got those that obviously need a winter rest and should burst into life after that rest as a consequence with new growth and flowers, we hope. And then we've got the others that ought to have a rest, but they don't seem, for me, to burst into life at the right time of year. They wait until May, June time. And I don't believe withholding water from firework night till June is actually going to do the plants any good. So I've still got to have a little bit of think about those. But don't forget, this is not an instruction manual. As I said before, this is what I do in my environment. I've tried to give you details of what my environment actually is and the reasons behind what I do. You can take that as you please, but in the description I'll put a list of all my dendrobiums and how I look after them and what the results have been. There's some good stuff in there, there's some not so good stuff with obvious reasons which I've tried to point out. I hope you'd enjoyed this. This is my favourite genus by far. they're just fascinating. There's so much variety, so many different flower sizes and types and colours and different ways of growing. It keeps the interest level up, if nothing else. If I had a shelf full of phalaenopsis, everything would be the same. And although I've got some and I think the world of them, that doesn't give me the variety for me to class it as a hobby. I need an interest. I need things to look up and find out and delve into the internet and do a bit of homework and all that sort of stuff. So my dendrobiums for me are my favourite genus. I hope you've enjoyed this. Sorry it's gone on a bit, but there was a lot to say and there's an awful lot of plants. It might have been worth splitting it in two, but anyway, it's one long video, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks for dropping by, thanks for watching, and thanks to all you wonderful subscribers and new people on the Orchidaholics Anonymous Facebook page. Thanks for watching. See you again.